All right. Today we are going to continue our discussion on segregation. Who can remind us what is segregation? Faith.
Judging people, like separating people by their race.
Okay, separating people by their race. Nino.
The separation of people by their race, gender, religion, or where they're from.
Very good.
Just separation in general of like how people dress, their race, and stuff like that.
Okay.
It could be like having two separate like public areas for different races.
Very good.
It's basically just more separating people based on their appearance.
Okay, good. We are going to be focusing, if you remember I said we're focusing on the period of the Civil Rights Movement. And what was our main segregation during the Civil Rights Movement? Tanner?
African American and white.
Very good, the African Americans and the whites. So today we are going to act as if we are in Old Town, USA. And Old Town, USA has segregation laws in there. You are going to get a card. And on your card it's going to tell you if you are African American or if you are Caucasian. Also on the card it gives you, it has a little thing on there as what you did in this town. After everyone has a card, then we're going to get everyone up, and all of my African Americans are going to come over here in this small section over here, and all of my Caucasians are going over there. And then we're going to go through the rules and see who breaks the most rules. Any questions while I'm passing these out? Yes?
Is a Caucasian like white people?
Yeah, a Caucasian is a white person. Yeah, you can look at it if you want. Yes?
Like when we get our cards, should we just like line up on the wall?
As soon as everyone has the cards, then I will get everyone up. We'll get up all at the same time.
Okay.
And that way we're not tripping over each other.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have one or two? You have two. That's what I thought. All right, does everyone have a card? Yes. All right, so if all of my Caucasians will get up and move over by the bulletin boards, all of my African Americans move over by the whiteboard. All right, is everyone where they belong? All right, I have 9 rules in Old Town, USA. If you violated any of my rules, when that rule comes up and you know you violated it, then you need to sit down because you are no longer allowed to be part of our town. You have to go to jail. So these are the rules. Okay.
The markers are clashing.
Yeah, the markers are fine.
Oh, it's because there's no. Whoa. Oh, that was just quick.
It's,
Yeah, I was gonna click it for.
and it's not, is it going to work? Yeah, click it and see. Okay, rules of Old Town. All right, click again. All right, our very first rule is no African Americans may walk through the front entrance of the library. So if you are an African American and you walked through the front entrance of the library, you need to sit down. Okay? Rule number 2. No African Americans may sit in the front row of a movie theater. Any African Americans that sat in the front row of the movie theater? Shh. Okay? Yes. Rule 3, no Caucasian or white person may sit in the balcony of a movie theater. Did any of my Caucasians sit in the balcony?
Gender, that's Caucasian.
Caucasian. Okay, next one. Rule 4, no African American may stay out late.
Austin's trying to pull it all night.
Okay. Rule 5, no African American may drink from a water fountain that has a sign stating whites only. Okay. Rule 6, no African American may vote. Are you seated?
Oh, no.
No. Okay. Okay.
Oh, yeah, you are. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
No.
That's a
He's a, yeah. All right. Next, number 7. No African American may go to a restaurant.
Wow.
Shh. Rule 8. No Caucasian may use a restroom with a sign that says colored only. And the very last one, Rule 9. No African American may sit in the front passenger car of a train. So, flip it back. Okay, so looking at our groups, we have 4 African Americans that are still standing. Do we have? No, 4. Okay. We have 4 African Americans, and then look at all of our Caucasians that are still standing.
There's 13.
There are 13. Okay. So go back to your seat now. Thank you.
I didn't break the law. What did you break?
Each group is getting a question sheet. Whoever I give it to is the group leader who will read the questions. Everyone is going to take turns discussing these. Shh. We are not all going to talk at the same time in our group, so we can make sure that everyone has a chance to talk and be heard. Any questions? None? All right, you may begin your discussion within your small group.
Do we write the answers?
Yes. Whoever I gave the question sheet to is going to write the answers. The leader will write the answers. Who did I give the paper to?
Me. You gave it in the middle and he grabbed it.
Well, then if he hit it first, he's the one.
But the middle of the paper.
Wow.
It was mainly facing.
Okay.
Because mostly blacks couldn't do a lot of things. Well, they mistreated them, sort of. And they would go to jail if they anything.
How do you think they were mistreated?
Like, because like, yeah, they didn't have a lot of freedom. Like, they couldn't vote or they couldn't go to movie theaters and watch movies.
And if they did what they weren't supposed to, they would go to jail.
Okay, good. And do you think the laws were fair or unfair?
Unfair.
Unfair. Okay. Good. You guys are on the first question still? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. And which question would you guys say for that? For who do you think? Do you think the rules were fair?
We said no. We said no because there were like more rules for the African Americans.
Okay.
And there was, because at the end there was more Caucasians standing up than there were African Americans, so the rules are more strict for the African Americans because of fair.
Okay. Okay. Good. Good.
Had unfair rules. Like, they couldn't use the same restrooms. Both of them had that rule that they had to use one specific restroom. And then they couldn't sit where they wanted to in a movie theater. I mean, they were only, like, colored people were only allowed to sit in the balcony. And then white people or Caucasian could only sit in, like, the front few seats.
Yeah, the Caucasian weren't allowed to sit in the balcony.
They wanted to be together in like the same place or weren't allowed to share anything together.
It was called Caucasian.
What? You can probably, yeah, you can do this.
So you think the rules were unfair for both people?
Because they were both unfair rules.
Okay. So even though we had more Caucasians standing up in our thing,
We still had some unfair.
Still, the few rules that made people sit down were unfair.
okay, good. So you didn't think that just the African Americans were treated unfairly. You thought the Caucasians were treated unfairly also. Very good.
So do I put
Andrew's here.
Okay.
The camera's on us.
Rules are fairer for one group. Fairer?
So did you think all the rules were fair for some but not for others?
Well,
They were fair for the whites.
Okay, so you think
for the Caucasians, not for the African Americans.
it's so strict for them. Like,
okay.
they can't
Yeah, because
go to a restaurant.
like you know how I was talking about how we're reading a book of literacy about this stuff. They literally thought blacks were like not as smart, and not as
They told them that they were animals when they brought slaves over.
So do you think it's fair?
they treated them like
So you think it's fair for them to tell the Caucasians that they're allowed to that they can't sit in a balcony?
no, it's not fair either.
But it's fairer.
technically they
It's
should have
fairer.
So the Caucasians have more fairness to their rules.
Yes.
Okay.
They only have like a limited amount.
The black people got in trouble by the white people when they voted, but they got that right in 1877.
Like the Caucasians have to
Okay,
follow the
very
basic
good.
laws of the U.S. The African Americans have to follow the basic laws plus the laws that the government set for them.
No, plus the laws of the state.
And the laws of the state.
And whatever the white people say, because the white people had all the power.
Yeah, they thought they were superior. They pretty much
Isn't Obama our first African American president? Yeah, I mean, that's proof. It's a given right there.
And I remember from the old school that I went to, it's American of Heaven. When he was elected, people were very not nice the next day.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I was happy
Yeah.
I got sanchez. I wanted
ECD teacher.
Oh well.
Very good. Great discussion.
And there was a lot of rumors about it.
How did you feel if you violated a rule? How did you feel if someone else violated a rule? How did you feel if you violated a rule, and how did you feel if someone else violated it?
Well, if I violated a rule, if I really did do that, then I would think that I should get the consequences, and if someone else violated that rule too, that they should get the same consequences.
What if they did it on accident though?
Still, if it's an accident. Like if you just accidentally run someone over, you still go to jail.
But that's
It doesn't
not
matter if it's accidental or purposeful.
if you're going to a restaurant. That's not fair to the African Americans that they can't go to that restaurant.
Good. So you think that if an African American went to a restaurant, then you're saying, yeah, they should have been arrested?
I'm saying that
Yeah, we're talking about the 9 rules of Old Town.
yeah, I know.
Yeah. So it says, how did you feel if you violated a rule? So if you were African American and you violated the rule that said you were not allowed to go to a restaurant, you think you'd feel okay and say, oh, I should have went to jail?
Well, no. What I'm saying is, if I did do that, then the white people should have to go to jail if they go to a restaurant. Because it's not fair to the black people that they can go, but they
You mean if the African Americans would have to go to jail just because they want to go eat out at a restaurant, the Caucasians would have to do that too, because otherwise it would be unfair. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Okay, so you're saying that, so what you're saying is the rules should apply to everyone. So, okay, so you don't think, so where the question says, how did you feel if you violated a rule? If you violated a rule, did you think it was okay?
Well, depending on what rule it was and the reasoning behind it.
It was not really unfair. Going to a restaurant.
I had voting. That seemed unfair. All the citizens should have a say.
Okay.
Or going to the movie theaters and sitting in the balcony.
That's allowed though.
Well, yeah, but it's not allowed for Caucasians though.
Right, but if you're thinking about it, how many Caucasians like to go and sit in the first row of a movie theater? And that was, I think, the rule that Caucasians have to sit in the front row of the movie theater. And where do you prefer, when you go to a movie theater, where do you prefer to sit?
The back.
The back, which would be more likely what? The balcony. So do you think, would you like them to say, you're going to jail because you wanted to sit in the back? And that's where African Americans should go, should sit.
Good.
So is it fair to have these rules, and okay, if you violate them, you should, the law should be enforced?
No, it's not okay.
Well, some of them just aren't okay, but I think most of them are. Yeah, it was good that they did have some rules against segregation.
So you think there were some segregation rules that were good?
Yeah. Not maybe like no, not really. I mean,
can you think of any segregation rule that was good?
not really. I mean, it's just not good to segregate.
Okay.
Plus, they don't like, if the African Americans don't like Caucasians and he's doing stuff, then that is kind of leaving with them.
Right, yeah. So so this is basically, the segregation is not only putting the whites against the blacks, but it's also putting the blacks against the whites too, right? Because they're both thinking that, if the whites are thinking, oh, the African Americans aren't following our rules, so they're bad, and then the blacks are saying these are unfair rules, and that's not right. So it's pitting them against each other, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Very good. So how are you going to answer that question? So you're back to the question, how did you feel if you violated a rule?
I felt it was unfair.
Okay.
Most of the blacks and Caucasian people.
Okay, good.
Yeah, they can track the end.
Do you guys do the back also? Yeah.
Okay. How much do the rules in this town compare to the rules in your own town? Be specific.
What's a lot different because they don't really judge people by their color anymore. They let people share. And their water fountains here, if there was a colored person here, they could even stay in the water. So they don't have to see a sign and say, oh, I have to use that.
Very good. So our rules now, like in Edgewood,
are a lot more fair.
Okay.
People.
Good. So they're not race specific.
Yeah, they're fair to everyone now instead of just the whites.
Very good.
They can do their own thing now.
Great.
Getting in trouble.
Very good. Good job.
We feel really stupid
I have 2 cards.
Okay. Which one did you go by?
I use this one.
Okay. They must. Some of them were sticking together.
Is this good for number 4?
Okay.
What would you feel about yourself and another person? What would be? I feel bad for myself and the other person for.
It could be. Why do you think that?
Because for the one where
the Caucasians had to sit down in the balcony. They should be allowed to sit up in the balcony.
Okay.
And you should be able to check them in.
Well, there should be no segregation.
Okay.
Yeah, overall.
Okay.
So you feel bad because there shouldn't be segregation.
Okay. Good. Yeah.
When you violate a rule, you feel bad for yourself, and then when other people you can feel bad for other people. Depends how bad, what the punishment is.
And I usually
Right.
feel real bad when I didn't do anything, nothing went wrong.
But it depends on the severity, and most of these are severe consequences.
Right. So feeling bad for other people that violated the rules, I guess would depend on if you felt like the rule was fair or not. So if you thought it was a crazy rule, like now, if we said anyone that stays up, doesn't go to bed at 8 o'clock is going to jail for a day.
I mean, that's not real fair. That's why I don't like it.
Right. So you're saying that you think someone else? It depends on on if you think the rules are fair or not. On if you will feel bad if someone else gets in trouble.
So I feel bad about segregation and the unfairness.
Okay.
And it would be even better if we know how this would actually happen.
So you think it would be different if you lived during that time and actually had the mentality of what these people had?
Yeah, it would be different.
Okay, yeah, because
the whole feeling would be different. Because just seeing all the segregation and stuff.
You'd just be used to being there.
yeah,
We can't imagine what it's like because that was so long ago.
right, yeah. Yeah, and people, Caucasians wouldn't actually tell you. Oh, they might say, I remember when it's like, but would they actually know how it felt to have these rules on them?
Yeah, because but the ones that live out there might come back and they're used to that lifestyle, and they would be so angry about what they did then.
Okay, good job. Yes.
What are we supposed to do when we're done?
Just go through and make sure that all of your, that you've answered them and you've given examples. When it says be specific, make sure you've included all the examples and all that.
Why are you wearing that little microphone?
So they can hear me? Yes.
We're done!
And you did the 2 questions on the back? Okay, very good. Just sit there for a few seconds. And you did the 2 on the back also? Yeah, just sit there for a few seconds. Okay. All right, as you are finishing, there are some people that are finishing up. Go through, make sure that you gave examples, you were specific. If it said to be specific, that you gave specific examples. And while the others are finishing up, and in just a few minutes, we will go through and discuss our questions and see how each group answered their questions and what their thoughts were on those. So we'll just take a couple more minutes to finish up.
All right, 5. What does it say?
There is no separation.
Is it just about finished? Good.
We even gave a lot of time.
Yeah, especially on this one.
Very good.
Finished, and we also wrote the definition of segregation.
All right, great. Very good. Just sit there. We've got a couple of groups. I think we have 2 or 3 groups that are finishing up on the last 2 questions, and then we'll share. Okay?
They are experienced because that doesn't make sense.
They are unfair rules. It is unfair judgment. I know, but I mean,
Well, maybe you could put yes because
They're unfair rules because they're based on the race.
Yeah, it's based on the race, so that's why.
You should have kept this. They are unfair rules.
Rules based on the race. So
They're unfair rules because they're based on race.
okay.
The unfair rules because they're based on the race.
Okay. Okay.
Next page.
How do the rules in this town compare to the rules in your Nothing alike.
Nothing.
There was we never had there's no segregation.
They're not alike because we don't have segregation today. Like
Based on the races,
yeah.
I mean,
There's no segregation today.
I mean, there's still people who are like racist, but segregation has
Yeah, it's like sort of like because some people still believe that segregation should be allowed. Like people who like inherited like the white Caucasian people who were slave owners.
Yeah, but there's still limits.
Yeah, but then most people believe that there's not as much segregation.
Okay. So based on the roles of like Edgewood. So that's what they're asking. Are they the same or are they different?
They're much different.
They're different. They're just a lot different.
The only rules they had against limits back when there was segregation were like the Jim Crow laws.
Okay. Very good.
There's not rules anymore because now they're like against the law to have segregation.
Okay.
But it still happens. But it still happens some like private places. Aren't some places you are allowed to have slaves and stuff?
Not in the United States.
Yeah, but there are some places.
In other countries, there is segregation still going on, and they could be based on, like in Pakistan, I believe, it's segregated based on religion, and so there's like religious segregation where if you don't follow a certain religion, then you can't do that. And in social studies, when we're talking more about cultures, they'll be talking about the cultures in other countries, and that will come up with how are other countries segregating now. So that will be discussed later about how are other countries segregating.
So it'll be nothing alike because our towns are not.
Because there's no segregation.
Yeah.
Not like that it's here. It's just like.
So what do you think? Are the rules of our town the same as that town?
The rules in our town are the same for all people. Unlike the rules in our town, it doesn't matter.
Are you talking about was our town? So the rules are the same.
Like the only separation,
Is it today?
No.
Yeah.
The only separation I can think of is like with clubs, like you're not allowed in unless you like
Unless you're a member.
or bathrooms or girls and girls.
Right, and that's just basic. That's more etiquette than
Fair.
yeah.
That's manner. Because it just be weird.
With a girl. It's just gender difference.
Okay. All right, let's go to the very last question so we can do our discussions.
Principles are and why.
All right, raise your hand if your group is still working. All right, we have 2 groups left. Those of you that are finished should be sitting there quietly. Some of us are getting a little carried away. We should not be pounding on the desks.
But it's still in some places. No, but still in some places.
Are we allowed to read a book while we wait?
Yeah, that's fine. All right, let's begin our discussion. Let's begin our discussion of how our groups answered each of the questions. So number 1, our very first question was, which group violated more rules in this town? Katerina, what'd your group say? Very good. Did anyone disagree with that? So every group agreed that the African Americans definitely violated the majority of the rules, right? Good. Number 2 says, did you think that the rules were fair? Why or why not? Emma, what'd your group say?
No, it is not fair because the African Americans are limited to had more limits than the whites.
Okay. Hannah, what did your group say?
We really just said that the African Americans had less options to do, and it was more they were more prone to break the laws.
Okay, good.
We basically just said that we didn't think it was fair because they had more laws saying that the African Americans couldn't do as many things as the Caucasian people could.
Okay, good. Aaron?
No, I don't think it's fair because there was more rules for the blacks than the whites.
Okay, good. Cameron, what'd your group say?
I said no because there are more rules for the African Americans than the Caucasian.
Okay.
He said no because African Americans didn't have much freedom.
Okay, good.
We said it was unfair because they based the rules on skin color.
Okay.
We didn't agree because African Americans have different skin colors and white doesn't mean they are the same as us.
Okay, good. So everyone basically agreed that the rules were not fair, right? And we said that it seemed like the African Americans all had more rules to follow than the Caucasians did. All right, number 3 said, were the rules fair to only one group of people, or did all people have some rules that were not fair? And then it said, be specific. There was lots and lots of discussion on this one. What'd you say?
We said yes, most of the rules were only fair to the Caucasian group. The Caucasians could do pretty much anything they wanted to as long as it didn't interfere with the colored things.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We said no. We said yes because the rules were unfair to the Caucasians because the African Americans didn't get the basic rights that the Caucasians did.
Okay. I know you guys wrote a really long thing on this. What did you come up with?
Had unfair rules because the Caucasians were not able to use the colored bathrooms, and the African Americans weren't allowed to use the white bathrooms. And the African Americans had to sit in the back of the buses, and they were not allowed to sit in the front. Also, Caucasians were not allowed to sit in the back of the buses or in the front. Also, the African Americans were not allowed to sit in the front of a movie theater, and they were not allowed to walk through the front entrance of the library. And the Caucasians were not allowed to sit in the back of a movie theater.
Okay, good. Austin, what'd your group say?
The rules were only fair to only one group of people because the Caucasians were allowed to stay out late and the African Americans weren't.
Okay. Drake.
We said that the Caucasians and the African Americans had rules, but the rules that they had weren't fair to all of them.
Okay. Aaron.
The rules were not fair to the blacks, but the rules were fair to the whites. And like if you also got in trouble for staying out late, but white people would be allowed.
Okay. Good.
We said no, they weren't fair because the African American citizens' rules didn't have as much forgiveness and fairness as the whites.
Okay. Clay.
We said those are unfair because you should be able to do whatever you want with no segregation.
Okay. Tanner, you have something to add?
I kind of sort of noticed that, like in this time period, that African Americans also weren't allowed to go to war. They weren't allowed to go to war if they had to, but they weren't. I didn't think they were allowed to be in the military.
That's that's a good thing to look at, and because I don't think any of our rules mentioned that. So that's something that maybe the next time we can look into that and see what were the rules on that. Good observation. All right. How did you feel if you violated a rule, and how did you feel if someone else violated the rule? There's a lot of different conversations going on with this one. And people struggled with trying to figure out the answer for this one. How'd you guys answer it?
We said that the African Americans were angry and mad because of their little freedom. I felt bad because it wasn't their fault what they did.
Okay. Alex, what'd your group say?
I feel bad for the people that go back in because the rules can be unfair and that you don't really know how the law was back then.
Very good. Yeah, their group said that they had a really difficult time trying to understand how, you know, how would you really feel if you, because they didn't live during this time. And, you know, they said, now we would say, oh yeah, we feel bad because we know it's wrong. But they said it might be different if they lived during that period of time, and that is the way people thought back then. So they said, you know, it was really hard to decide how would they truly feel if they were in that time period when this was the way of life. So they said, you know, that really was hard for them to decide on. Nino.
My input was that it was unfair. I was African American and I felt bad because they just used their freedom. Like, they were using their freedom, but like they didn't really have freedom. Yeah.
Okay, so that what the town was calling their freedom, you said that they were.
The U.S. had promised freedom, but they didn't have actual freedom, so
Okay, very good.
We felt it was unfair when we violated a rule because the rules kept us from doing things we wanted to do. And we felt it was unfair because they did not give bad punishment to someone else who violated a rule.
Okay, and your group also had struggled with that because, Drake, what was your initial thought on that?
That if an African American did something to get in trouble, that if the Caucasians did that, they should get in trouble too.
Okay, yeah. He said, you know, if they break the rule, they should get in trouble. And I think Daniel said, but is it if, you know, you wanted to go to a restaurant and they said no because you're black, is that fair? And Drake said, well, no, but so they were going back and forth on what you know, how was it fair, how was it not fair?
Our group said that if we violate a rule during that time period, we probably would feel guilty because a lot of times it was, well, rules were unfair, but you didn't really know that then because that was the only thing you really knew. And if you saw somebody else, I'm sure they would say, oh, that's giving people justice for their freedom so that they're safe. But it's really not. There's no, I would feel guilty now because seeing them just being put to jail because they're going to the wrong restroom.
Right. Yeah. And do you think it made a difference back then if you were white versus Caucasian versus African American on your view of are the rules fair or not? Do you think that would have made a difference if you were African American and you had all these rules to follow, which it appeared, I think we had what, 2 rules that applied to Caucasians? So, you know, do you think that would play a difference, depending on race, as how fair you think the rules were? You think that would make a difference? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
We read about how the Caucasian felt and how the African Americans felt. He said for the Caucasian, he said, I felt it was unfair and that people should be punished. And for the African Americans, he said, I felt accomplished that I actually stood up for myself and showed them that the rules don't matter.
Okay, good. Yes.
Well, the African Americans didn't like go over there. Someone brought them over, slaves, and then like their ancestors were slaves and they ended slavery. Then they started all this stuff, and they might have thought, well, why do we have to follow all the rules if we're not the ones who wanted to go here?
Okay, good. She said, you know, they didn't choose. She said their ancestors didn't choose to come here. They were brought here as slaves, and slavery was outlawed, yet they then put all these rules on them, and they were thinking possibly it was unfair because they didn't even choose to live here and they're being forced to live a specific way. Good insight. All right, how did you think these rules compared to the rules of our town now? Are our town rules the way these are? Like in Edgewood, do these rules follow the same rules we have in Edgewood?
Now in our town, African Americans have all the same rights that the Caucasians have now, but like they can all vote and they can drink from the same water fountains and use the same restrooms.
Okay, very good.
They're really now versus the Old Town USA. really all the rules in Old Town USA were based on separation of the races. Well, now we don't have any of those rules, so there's no rules that are actually similar to those, other than just how people treat each other. There's no actual like written rules.
Okay, very good.
We said that the rules are more fair in our town today because they go for both races, and there are still limits on people, but they're not just on blacks or they're not just on whites.
Great.
We said that in their town that they did not have as many freedoms as the Caucasians did, but today in like Edgewood that the Caucasians and the African Americans have the same amount of rules and laws, and that the Caucasians also got more laws added on.
Okay. Okay, good. Tanner.
Well, basically now in our towns in the USA, they're basically saying, like in Old Town USA, the laws were a little bit more loose to the whites, and to the blacks they were a lot more strict. But now they laid their foot down and said, look, we need strict laws for everyone. So they changed the laws that they knew weren't fair, like the different restrooms and the segregation part of it. But all the laws that the black people had to follow that the white people were kind of loose on, now the white people have to follow just as much as the black people do. So it all even out together.
Okay, good.
We said to let all the races share everything and everything equal through all races, and they can express themselves now and not be what the whites wanted them to be, and they can do what they want.
Okay, good.
They said there was nothing alike because there's no segregation anymore today in the United States, but back then there was a lot of segregation.
Okay. Great.
Back then, African Americans didn't have a lot of freedoms, but then like now we all have the same rights and freedoms.
Okay, very good. And our very last one said, explain what democracy basic principles are and why or why not the rules of this town followed those principles. So thinking of the basic democracy principles, what are the basic principles of democracy?
That like every citizen has freedom of like speech, religion, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Okay, good.
In a democracy, everybody has a say in the decisions, and that everybody has rights, and that everybody can all have the same exact rules.
Okay, good.
In a democracy, no one man is better than the other. All people are equal. So if basically all the laws are the same for every single person, there's no person that can break the law and get away with it.
Okay, great.
The basic principle is that all men and women are created equal, but in that specific town, almost no one was created equal.
Okay. Who do you think in this town did they think was better? Who did they think ranked higher in like importance than, you know, in their town over the other? They thought one person was a better race than the other.
The white people.
They definitely, I think the Caucasians had definitely more rights than an African American. Yes.
That also had to do with like all the leaders and the decision makers of the government in the U.S. were white, so they probably, you know, since there was segregation, they probably went easier on whites since they were whites themselves.
Okay, good. Nino.
Wasn't it just like the white men who were the highest?
Well, by the 1960s, when we were talking about the civil rights movement, when it was happening, women had were given the right to, they had voting rights and everything else. So women actually were given rights before African Americans.
So, like, you know that during the time it was unfair, and it wasn't like the Declaration, sort of, because it sort of showed that all people should have freedom.
Okay, good.
So, back then it was like, it wasn't really much of a democracy, but then now it is because of the more segregation.
Okay, very good. And just see how well you guys know your history. Does anyone know what the Declaration of Independence claims? That our democracy is based on that this didn't follow.
It was based on that all men are created equal.
All men are created equal. Did this have all men created equal? No.
It means by man, it means by like white man, isn't it? Like,
Well, that's what they came back and said, because that was one of the stands during the civil rights movement, is they kept referring back to that and saying, but this is what the United States was based on, and they kept the whites started saying, but the interpretation was this. This is what they meant. And so they kept changing it, trying to make it fit into, justify their reasons for these segregations. So yeah, back then, it very possibly when they wrote that, that could have been what it is. But yeah, but it's changed over time.
Didn't the Caucasians have the mentality, that the African Americans were more property?
Yes.
Yeah, they thought they were like animals and they weren't as smart as them.
Right, yeah.
They treated them like animals and they thought that they bred them like animals.
Yeah. Do you remember where, in our discussion last week, where did we say it was worse? Remember we said the United States was kind of divided. Where do we say it was worse?
The South.
In the South. And the South kept them in, and if we go back to slavery, where was slavery most predominant?
South.
In the South. So during this whole time period where segregation was really bad, it was in the South where they were really upset when slavery was outlawed in the 1800s. So they, did believe that they could be considered, they were not at all equal, and they were more. Yes.
At first they thought slavery was wrong. I read this out of a book that was on in literature. But at first they thought slavery was wrong, but then the slave owners said that they were just animals, they were like the cows or something.
Well, they got money for it too. They got money for the work that they didn't have to do.
Exactly.
Freeing them over from Africa and started freeing them.
Yes.
It was illegal.
Yeah.
They basically didn't think they were humans at all.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that if you look at our look at the roles that are on our cards, or what we had said, what are some of the roles that made you, that they had, that you kind of looked at and you thought, why? Why would that make a difference? What are some of those? What's one that you thought?
Like that the African Americans weren't allowed to drink from the Caucasian water fountains.
Exactly. What difference did it make? What water fountain? You'd sit there now, we think, why would that make a difference? But back then, they definitely thought that if an African American drank out of their water fountain, they were going to do something to that water. It was like just, they really thought something would happen if they drank out of the same water fountain.
That African Americans weren't allowed to walk in the front door of the library.
Okay, okay. Does it make a difference what door you walk in? No, but they thought it was a big, why did they think that was something that was of importance?
That African Americans, when they go to nuclear, they have to sit in the balcony.
Right, the African Americans have to sit in the balcony. We talked about that at one of the groups. We were talking about that because I said, and I think wasn't the Caucasian rule, they must sit in the front row?
Yeah.
And we talked about, well, now, when you go in a movie theater, where do you prefer to sit? In the back, which would be considered the balcony, and the majority of us would be violating that rule because we would be sitting where the African Americans should be sitting, and we're not allowed to sit back there. So does it make, that's a personal preference when you go into a movie theater to go in and say, oh, I want to sit in the back, I want to sit in the middle, or I want to sit in the front. I don't know many people that like to sit in the front, but for some reason, in Old Town, they thought that's where white people should sit, is in the front of the movie theater. Yes?
Kind of like what they said. Going to the movie theater, the African Americans weren't allowed to sit in the front row. And sometimes people maybe didn't have good sight. So it's like, it's not really fair to African Americans that they have to sit in the back. What if they can't see the movie?
Right. Yes?
African Americans were allowed to stay up late.
Okay. They weren't all, yeah, there was one that said they couldn't stay out late, which is, you know, is like something would happen if they stayed out after dark. They were going to turn into something or do something, you know, dangerous to everyone else. Yes?
Back to the, like, sitting in front of the theater, like, back then, like, there wasn't really, like, screens. Like, it was kind of like, sometimes there might have been, like, a, kind of like a play. Yeah, like a play. Like a play. I don't know. So, like, the front row, like, maybe be better for white because they can see people better. It kind of looks like it's like a play sort of thing right here.
Well, that picture that you have on there is of the people at the top. That was your telling you if you were Caucasian or African American.
No, not the top.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay. Yes.
I was thinking, well, like, didn't they have some screens that didn't have sound?
They did. What a lot of them had is it was like a stage, but the screen was behind, like you had a stage and a screen. So there was a screen because they had the, you know, the black and white movies and all that, but there was like a stage also where they could do both, like a live performance or a movie at the same place.
Why would you want to sit in front? Because then you have to look up like this.
I don't know, because even like now when I go to see a play, I prefer to sit in the balcony because I think you have a better view of like everything that's going on stage. I prefer to sit like more in the balcony and like look down onto the stage, which I wouldn't be allowed to do back then. Nino. Okay, the restroom sign that said colored only. Okay, yes.
The African Americans couldn't sit in one of the front passenger seats.
Okay. She's talking on the trains that they couldn't sit in certain seats on a train.
Certain, like all the African American children had to go to a different school than all the other children.
Okay. Yes.
The African Americans could go to restaurants.
You're glad that they weren't allowed to go in a restaurant? Drake.
That they had to go through the back door to the library.
Okay. Good. Okay, they'd use different restrooms. If you think of the restrooms, if you had to look for a male or a female restroom, and then a white or a colored restroom, and you think of the places, restrooms, do you know how hard that would be to find a place to go to the bathroom if you weren't?
It just runs their plumbing bill up.
It could run their plumbing bill up too.
They just felt like they should have it that way. Even if they did cost more, they wanted to get those still good rates.
Very good. Yeah. All right. We've ran out of time today. You need to stop. Put all of your cards in the center and your group paper underneath it. We will continue our discussion tomorrow. You may go.